Namaskar. Today is June 2nd, Tuesday, and welcome to Daily Global Insights. This is Sree and Sree, episode number 175. We begin with news from United States. Sridharji, in United States, a major meat producer, JBS USA, has been reeling from organized cybersecurity attack that has disrupted its operations in United States and abroad. Sir, what do you think is the cause? Is it also another ransomware attack?
It is another ransomware attack, and I think just we are receiving the breaking news is the confirmation that it's somewhere from Russia. But we are going to soon find out it's just a ransomware attack. It's not any government initiated or a covert attack by the Russians, as was the case. It was suspected in the colonial pipeline attack and other attacks that has happened around the world. But clearly, it has disrupted, and it happened on Sunday. The operations are at least trying to get back into gear. But more than 9 states where the operations have been impacted, including in Brazil and Australia. Brazil is the headquarters. Yeah.
And remember, viewers, that when the Georgia state passed new voter registration laws, that Major League Baseball made a move away for its All-Star game from Atlanta. Now there's a lawsuit that demands that the MLB move it back to Atlanta or pay 100 million as damages. So this is the established groups who had planned on this game being played in Atlanta. And as you know, if you have seen IPL, you know that there's a lot of organization that goes around it, a lot of logistics, a lot of things get moved around. All those things now have gone waste. So that is what is this lawsuit about. Sridharji, what can you tell us about this lawsuit? And do you think it has a chance to succeed?
It's by Job Creators Network. The suit has been filed in New York, which is where the MLB headquarters is. There's also conservative groups supporting it. There's small business groups supporting it. The Cobb County is making a case that the many people who are affected are the minority communities. The minority communities own small businesses in that part of the county, which is pretty close to where the games were being held. As you rightly pointed out, there's substantial amount of planning and infrastructure that was put in place, and there's a huge revenue implication. If you recall, during the Georgia elections, they were saying that they need the lockdowns to be lifted because many of them have been impacted by the shutdowns or the lockdowns, as you may call it. So I think there's a very strong opportunity that this could come back, or this would be 100 million, somewhere close to some amount of fine being paid, because there's definitely business disruption and impact.
And in other news, Biden administration is suspending all oil and gas leases in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge as it reviews environment impacts of drilling. Now, this has been in the pipeline for a long time. Alaska is one of the major suppliers of oil. As a matter of fact, Alaskans, if I remember correctly, get a paycheck from their state of around $3,000, whether it is a month or per year, I don't know. That is called as the gasoline dividend. And I'm sure they are going to ask a question or two about this. What are your thoughts, sir?
Well, firstly, it's a 19.6 million acre rich oil reserve. It is also home to, the environmentalists would say, to polar bears, caribou, snowy owls, migrating birds, etc., etc. This issue has been on the boil since 1995, when both Democrats and Republicans supported it, and then President Clinton vetoed it. And then, of course, in 2016, when President Trump became the president, he looked at it and he said the environmental agency, which has put this case together, lack credibility, because apparently when you make a case, the analysis should include what is reasonable alternative. In the absence of a lack of reasonable alternative, EPA cannot enforce under the pretext when huge amount of revenue that flows in is involved, as you pointed out. So this is yet to be tapped, but it is home to zillions of barrels of oil. So this is the background. So this is the fight, and that is going to not just stop here. It's going to extend into number of areas as the story unfolds within the Biden administration.
If one were to look at the US presidency as a black box, then it's very easy for one to come to the conclusion that it is not the man who's anointed president who is calling the shots. Somebody is moving the levers from behind. This is becoming very, very clear. I don't know when one of these schemers are going to spill the beans, but we certainly are working hard to find out and prove to you that it is not Mr. Biden who's doing all this stuff. It's just one disaster after another. And here's the next one. Biden's coming war on farmers. Team Biden will assert that PM 2.5, and Sree will explain what that is, kills hundreds of thousands annually, and that there is no safe level of exposure. Is it a fertilizer or what is it, sir?
A new study by somebody from Obama administration, which is an independent group. I think they were granted about $10 million to conduct this study. It's very interesting. They find that the emissions cost from fertilizers, machinery used, tilling, all these things that go on in farming results in this dust that is going up, and that's called as PM 2.5. And how many people get killed? Between 3.5 to 8 people annually get killed. So to me, it's an environmental issue. So therefore, we must now look at the amount of farming land that is cultivatable. Plus, you must also be looking at what kind of control mechanisms that needs to be put in place. So if we talk about height of hypocrisy and basically the height of what I call as very ostentatious approach by Biden and his team to look at everything, anything to basically, go after the red states where agriculture is the reigning profession, then they're hitting the nail on the head. And I think this is where this is coming from. How do you go after these people and basically stop rural farming and then move towards, I don't know what the alternative is, whether they will say, maybe we should import everything from China. By the way, China imports, it doesn't have enough food for feeding its own people. It is reliant on imports, which is one of the reasons why they are in this conquest of all these different places, because they don't believe in producing, or they don't believe in importing, exporting. They don't believe in importing. They only believe in exporting. But if they own the lands from where they acquire, be it Australia, be it Nepal, be it Bhutan, be it Sri Lanka, or be it South Asian nations, then their food needs are met. Okay, so I think that this is a ludicrous effort that is more to come on this, and we will report more stories as Biden and his progressives go after these stupid and silly programs, which is mitigating all the economic activity which brings home revenues.
If the Biden administration is serious about saving the climate, then they need to look no farther than beef. B as in boy, E as in echo, E as in echo, F as in fox. The amount of impact producing beef in a commercial way, if you have gone to any beef farm, you will be aghast to see the inhuman conditions in which these cattle are grown, and then they're taken to the abattoir, and the amount of water and other resources that are expended to do this thing. Please first fix that one and tell America, okay, from tomorrow onwards, no beef for you, and see what happens. See, this is stupid nonsense that's going on. That's just me, sir. I could be wrong. I'm just an independent. I hold no brief for Trump. Neither do I hold a brief for any of these so-called progressives. I don't know if they can even spell beef. Let's hope that they can. Next news, DC Liberal take on Big Pharma. lower drug prices versus fewer new cures as it shakes up the pharma industry. Again, there was an interesting video that I had put up with Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai on PGurus channel, where we were talking about how the pharma industry is trying to move away from drugs to vaccines, so that anything that they produce as vaccines, two things. One is every year the poor patient has to buy it. The second thing is vaccines are not as liable for the company as drugs are. If somebody were to have injurious harm from ingesting a drug, that company is responsible, but not so if they are selling a vaccine. So your thoughts?
My thoughts are that this is yet another agenda of the progressive Biden administration, basically to go after what we call as redistribution of wealth and shifting of the burden. So if you attack the pharma industry and force them to reduce prices on the critical drugs or across the industry for distribution, then there is a cost involved in less used but highly required drugs. One, those prices are going to shoot up because it's a zero-sum game on the profitability side for the pharma industry. That's number one. Number two is what they're pointing out is that there is specific research that they need to conduct. They allocate significant part of their profits towards the research for attempting to cure new types of diseases that are looming out there. So all those research programs are going to be stopped. So the question is, therefore, when you make this approach, what is the cause and effect that flows into it? It looks like the progressives are saying, we couldn't care, we need to fix the current, we don't care about the future, we'll deal with it. And that is going to only result in a disaster. So whether they will get away with it, we don't know. But right now, the way the Biden administration is governing and conducting the whole legislative process is you pass an executive order or you send it to the House passes the bill, it comes to the Senate, they have no votes in the Senate, so then they bring Harris in, and then Harris overrules. And if filibuster cannot be applied, that is the 60 votes that is required, then you go to the president, and president signs the order and basically asks the pharma industry to implement. So we have kind of come up with a new type of an architecture where you will bulldoze your way into getting the programs, irrespective of the legal aspects involved from a constitutional point of view, and also the cause and effect of the economic consequences. That seems to be the way Biden is going, and this pharma is one more example. And farming is another example. Pipelines is another example. Illegal immigration is. We can go on and on and on. When you look at these programs, there seems to be no scientific economic rationale, but just simple bulldozing its way towards what they believe in the agenda rather than the economics.
Sir, one wonders if this is how this government is going to work, that it is going to rely on its partisan strength to pass legislation in Congress and Senate. Then one almost wonders if all the Republican elected congressmen, women, and senators should just go back to their constituencies and work on the 2022 elections. Why even be in Washington, D.C.? Because nobody is listening to you. Nobody is covering what you're saying. You might as well go and picket in front of the Mexico border. At least one or two stray social media channels such as ours will pick it up and at least broadcast that these guys are trying hard to make sure that the illegal immigration is stopped. This has become like a joke. What exactly is so? My big problem here, sir, is when Democrats come, they violently pull everything in one direction. Then the Republicans come, and in the name of setting it right, they violently pull it in the right direction. For God's sake, we need to move forward, not sideways, left and right. This is just my rant, sir. I don't know what your thoughts are, but let's go on to the next one. Supreme Court rules asylum applicants bear the burden of proof, reversing Ninth Circuit. Now, this is interesting. Perhaps you can explain this a little bit more, sir.
Okay, great. So what happens is when you have an asylum seeker or when somebody who has come in illegally, now the word illegal doesn't exist, so a migrant, when he is presented in front of the circuit courts, the case is argued by the government, Department of Justice. and basically, or the ICE, or the immigration enforcement officials, right? Not Department of Justice, the immigration department. So you have them, making the case. So what the circuit courts have decided is that um, the government makes its case to say there's not enough evidence for him to be given the asylum. That's what the government says. Whereas what you find is the circuit court ruled that the fellow stays on in United States basically because the person it is not up to the individual to establish his credentials as valid credentials. It is up to the government to prove that his credentials are illegal. So this was contested in Supreme Court. Supreme Court in a 9-0, that means unanimous verdict, said this violates the constitutional process. This is what is enshrined in the Constitution and passed by the Congress. Namely, a guy who is illegal has to justify why he needs an asylum and establish his credentials. It's not up to the government to go after and spend money to establish the credentials of the individual. It is the person who is seeking the asylum must establish the credentials. So they have overruled and reset it. This is yet another progressive agenda. What you're going to find is that this fellow who is going back, who is going to be deported, will not be deported. And the new policy that Biden is coming up with is going to say, well, you were deported, but now we bring you back because we don't classify you as an illegal migrant. You are now a legal aspirant trying to seek a permanent residency or citizenship in this country. We welcome you. That's what is going to happen. Supreme Court has ruled, but the Biden administration will use its executive order to bring this guy back in.
Viewers, if you look at this one particular instance about allowing illegals, I'll always call it illegal, because if this is what is going to happen, I can see in the near future, every American citizen selling their house, selling whatever immovable property they have, getting on an RV and getting a certification that they are a migrant, and they will also start enjoying the benefits of the state. Why do they have to work and pay taxes? This is anarchy at its infancy, and it just doesn't make any sense for me. Sir, Joe Biden's DHS now wants to bring deported aliens, illegal aliens, back to the US. Mr. Mayorkas drafts the roadmap for mass migration. This thing, again, is proof that there are more than one hand steering the ship. Because there is one ruling one day, exact opposite the other day, and then again somebody tries to set things right. Where the heck is the chief of staff? He's supposed to be the one maintaining discipline. What is happening to Ron Klein? Missing in action, sir.
As Ron Klein is missing in action, another great personality who is missing in action, who is supposed to be in charge, is the Vice President of the United States, Miss Kamala Harris. She's tasked. She's saying, I don't want to get my hands dirty and probably upset my presidential chances. So I'm neither visiting the border, but what I will do, I will travel across to Mexico and to Central America, and then I will talk about developmental programs in those nations. Whereas here I won't touch any of these things, which is namely, let Mr. Mayorkas and let Madam Escobar, who is this deputy secretary, deal with this issue around immigration, subjects, etc., etc. And these guys are, prepared to make statements that is very contrarian to the reality, on ground reality, what's happening in United States.
I can tell Madam Kamala Harris that, not every site is going to forget about all the shenanigans that happened in the first few months of this presidency. All these are going to come and bite you in the wrong place, ma'am. And by the way, we compete with elephants for memory, so we do remember. So you can be sure of that. Biden prods Congress to support a bill that would allow about 11 million undocumented immigrants to apply for legal permanent residency and citizenship. So you have migrants coming in, new storm. Then the existing people of 11 million, he's going to try and normalize them. And then this is gerrymandering of its worst kind, most obvious. And I can't, I'm just aghast that there are other people who become, citizens after forever, because they have to go through the right process of getting the citizenship into this country. Why don't you let all the students who come in also automatically become citizens? Why don't you give them a roadmap for that too? Why not? They are the ones actually going to be funding your pie in the sky programs. Well, you might as well do that too. So, your thoughts?
I think you have analyzed and you have, framed it very, very appropriately within the context of the whole shenanigan or schmozzle, as I call it, that is called as immigration that is going on. I think these progressive have a much broader agenda. The broader agenda is to make sure that the Democrats, the progressive-led Democrats, retool United States, and they want to remain in power eternally. And the only way they can do it is bring all these illegals from outside and basically, put a program in place. All of them can vote from day one and distribute them across all different states, economically hurt the red states. And, this gas pipeline is one, this labor reforms is another, there's all this, what you call the unemployment and COVID benefit programs is another. Then we'll come to the infrastructure plan programs shortly about how the money is being laid out. When you look at all these things, you really either don't need to work or the government gives you to do minimum amount of work so that you really can bring this economy down and you borrow your way. So we're going to borrow $6 trillion per year for the next 4 years. That's $24 trillion to be added as part of what is not accounted for from the revenue side of the budget. We'll discuss that separately, but that is where we are heading with this progressive administration.
Yes, indeed. And in Indian news, Indian scientists to study the efficacy of the single dose Covishield vaccine and mixed doses of vaccines, government to step up vaccinations to 10 million vaccines per day with stepped up manufacturing from Covishield, Covaxin and Sputnik 5 from mid-July to early August. It still takes a few weeks to turn and crank it up. So that's why they are showing this timeline. So your thoughts?
I think my thoughts are that this is consistent with some of the research that is going on in the United States. The U.S. scientists are also looking at, whether you can do a single shot vaccine and then whether you can do a mixed portion vaccine that could also incorporate a booster dose rather than a two-shot vaccine. That's very much a research that is going on also in the United States. So it's good to see that the Indian scientists are doing something with the Indian versions of the vaccines, which is the Covishield is the AstraZeneca modified Indian version. Covaxin is the homegrown Indian vaccine. And clearly Sputnik has stepped up and come in, and it wants to be part of the Indian vaccine program. I would not like to miss out two important people. One is the Eli Lilly, which is working with 5 manufacturers, and then also J&J. Notwithstanding the challenges in the United States, J&J wants to work in India with the manufacturers to deliver a single-shot vaccine. Then I think there is also the Hyderabad, I forget the name, it is called either Zilas or we have covered that. I think you have covered that, Sree, in the program, that so there is another single shot vaccine that is also being contemplated from India. So you have a range of programs, and they're now looking at how to optimize rather than go ahead with these two-shot programs. One cocktail for the first, and then a mixed cocktail for the second.
And India's active COVID cases fall below 2 million. So at least some light at the end of the tunnel, sir.
It is. I think the number is now somewhere close to 187. The net active cases are coming down by virtue of more people getting discharged relative to less people contracting the disease. Well, the damage has occurred by virtue of the calamity that has struck India, the calamity that struck United States and India, and Brazil are the 3 most affected countries by virtue of the contraction or the spread of the COVID, where you have seen maximum number of people impacted in terms of the contraction of the ailment and the maximum number of casualties relative to the number of active cases. So I think in an Indian case, it is just sheerly volume. And in United States, the fatality rate relative to the total is very, very high, 600,000 to about 30 million people who contracted. That's a very significant number. And we saw that in the first year. And most of it occurred when the vaccine was not out. So India survived the first wave and got affected in the second wave. The United States took the bulk of the hit in the first wave, and Brazil is continuing its challenges. So I think that's my take.
And on Indian conspiracy theories, you can mull this over. I know a lot of you have watched this thing called Sacred Games in Netflix. And if you look at the whole premise of that plot, I don't know how much of it was captured in the movie series, but the book is certainly worth a read. That a certain politician finds it very convenient to get himself admitted in the hospital just around the time the second wave broke out. Was it engineered? Who knows? At least this government has acted proactively and said that there's a third wave coming. Clearly, there's some intelligence gathering that has happened, and they know that somebody is seeding all these things. This is again conspiracy theories. You can take my word for it, or you can find out the truth for yourself. Next point: index of 8 core industries: coal, crude oil, natural gas, refinery products, fertilizer, steel, cement, and electricity. The April 2021 production rises over 56%. Was this 56% year over year or quarter over
Year
quarter,
over
sir?
year, year over year,
Year
year
over
over
year.
year, not quarter, year over year.
And Indian manufacturing activity slips in May, and SBI now forecasts a GDP growth of 7.9%. I think it was earlier saying 10%, probably it's a 2% adjustment, sir.
The original projection was 12%, 12 to
Okay.
12.8%. And now they're saying by virtue of this extended lockdowns, they believe that it could be 8%. I still believe that there would be a stimulus that Indian government would be launching, very similar to US, another stimulus. Of course, in United States we have continuous stimulus. We don't stop. Every quarter we have stimulus. So therefore, here Indian government is contemplating the next stimulus program, so which may tilt it to about 10% if there is no further lockdowns or shutdowns, as the case may be. I have one big issue with these lockdowns here in United States, and I keep trying to say to the policymakers, you really have to study the red states, the Republican states such as Florida, Republican states such as Texas, Republican states such as Tennessee, Republican states such as what you call Wisconsin. You just have to study these states, or even Idaho for that matter, which is agriculture. You really have to study and find out whether really the lockdowns and shutdowns help, or whether the opening the people to go into the atmosphere, go and feel the natural ecosystem and environment, help them in conjunction with social distancing and wearing the mask. That's the two important. In Republican states, there was no mask, but social distancing norm was prevalent, and all those economies have done well. Whereas those deep blue or blue economies where we shut down the economies, they have not done well. So I don't know whether India is doing the right thing, or India firmly believes that it cannot do social distancing. Therefore, lockdown and shutdowns are the only ways to go. We don't know, but that's an issue that India must kind of look at.
And meanwhile, in Russia-related news, no change in S-400 contract with India will continue as per agreement, says Russian Foreign Secretary Lazarov. So I think, if I remember correctly, India was slow walking it, saying that we don't need it today, we can take it a little bit later. I don't know if India was saying that or if Russia was saying that we'll have to delay it. So maybe you can clarify some of these things, sir, and then we can move on to the next section.
I think that this is in one simple sentence. It's the shifting geopolitics. That's all I can say. So I think that I don't think anything has changed, and there have been people shouting at the top of the voice around what they think they want to. But what privately, Lazarov was in along the same time. Kelly was in India. Lazarov was in India. So I think what happens between between the conversations between the governments, we don't know, but it very clearly that this is, in my view, a shifting political landscape. Who knows? I think Russia is back with India and, as an ally, and says, okay, now we are together and I'll help you deal with it. And that seems to be the trend. Of course, France and Israel are very much anchored with India. UK is very much anchored with India. And some of the West Asian nations are very much anchored with India. This is notwithstanding the fact what happens to Mr. Netanyahu later today.
And in global news, Egypt's intelligence chief holds truce talks with Hamas in Gaza. This is the first, isn't it? Egypt is coming into Gaza to hold talk while there is an Israeli government in place.
This is another, a policy that Mr. Blinken's visit has resulted in. Blinken's visit to Israel resulted in two things. One is the shift in power from Benjamin Netanyahu. Second, Egypt acquiring a significant role in the truce that is being played out. What used to be called Palestinians and Israelis, now we have a third player called Hamas. So it is Hamas and Palestinians and Israelis, where Egypt is the truce maker, right? And now to have this truce being held in Gaza, when you have a state of Israel, Israel has to feel whether its sovereignty is being compromised by a third nation coming in and talking about, peace in its own country. So many people say Iranians have implicitly won this game, hands down. So is there an Iranian play which is happening behind the back or behind the Biden administration? Time will tell.
And Myanmar heads for a long and bloody civil war as resistance militia steps up attacks on the junta. So now you have hardening stances on both sides, but the resistance militia is very unorganized, isn't it? I mean, there's no. What is this comprised of, sir?
It is a new resistance group of probably a lot of them is Suki's supporters. Plus, probably, it's a lots of, this is a game that is going on again between, China versus non-China, and Russia has also got investment in Myanmar. So there's a new set of people who probably are funded. They seem to be organized, and
we're at a home in Ashkelon.
That if this is not brought to an end, this could be much more damaging to Myanmar's economy. And this could be lasting for days. Usually, when you have a civil war that goes on for a long time, the economy gets destroyed. Just recently, Myanmar came out of its junta regime and became mainstream and was inducted into ASEAN. We saw the resurgence. There was also an ASEAN Economic Summit that was held in Myanmar. But I think it looks like we're back to square one.
And the Royal Malaysian Air Force scrambled its jets after it noticed 16 PLA Air Force planes heading into its airspace. More saber rattling?
I think that not only saber rattling, but China is testing the veracity. There is a vacuum. There is a global power vacuum. So it is casting its net fast and wide. Remember, Malaysia canceled China's infrastructure project. It did not give access to some of the things that the China was asking it to do. The Malacca Strait is a very important passage in the Malaysian corridor. So what does it do? It sends the 16 planes and calls it as it's a routine operation, probably spilled into airspace. Whenever you talk to the Chinese, whenever you say they spilled in, well, it's part of our territory. It's called extension of its ever volatile and flexible, ever elastic and flexible territory that China owns around the world. It can it can enter at will, it can withdraw at will, because it thinks that in the absence of a global superpower, it can do anything that it wants.
And viewers, we want to take a quick segue and show you a small video clip of Senator Ted Cruz visiting the house in Ashkelon where the healthcare provider from India, Soumya, got killed by a rocket that was launched by Hamas. Here we go. It's a very short clip. You can take a look at it.
We're at a home in Ashkelon in southern Israel. This is a home where an elderly woman and her caretaker were when a Hamas rocket came and hit the home. You can see the elderly woman, that's her bed. They got the warning that the rocket was coming. She evacuated. Her caretaker didn't make it out. Her caretaker was killed right here. You can see the damage of the rocket Going over here, the rocket came through the roof of the house, destroyed the roof of the house. If you go to the back of the house, you can see this is all of the damage that came from one Hamas rocket, one terrorist who murdered a woman here in Ashkelon.
And that was the clip of the place where Saumya was working. Our heartfelt condolences for the family. What has been a very serious, death in the family got really politicized by the Kerala political apparatus. None of them turned up even to, as part of handing the body. It's very, very sad when you see that a representative of the Israeli government accompanies it and goes to the house and says how much he appreciated the service of this service provider, healthcare provider, and that Indian politicians, for whatever reason, these guys have their head, I don't know where. Anyway, this is just my observation. But then the people deserve this. If you elect such lumpens, this is what you're going to get. Sir, next news. US flags serious concerns over Cambodia's China-backed new Navy base. Are they going to, is US just going to keep talking, or are they going to do something about it, sir?
I think this U.S. would have acted under the Trump administration. Present Biden administration. What do you see as an activity in? There was saber rattling in the first initial days. A couple of times they went down the Taiwan Strait. Then they said they're going to form an alliance between Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. I think Korea soft pedaled it. And now, what do you have? Reagan has been moved out and is going towards Middle East, where it came from. That Reagan and Nimitz were the two carriers which were supposed to maintain deterrence and peace in the region. So they've answered the question. I have mentioned this again. In 2008 to 2016, it is the Obama-Biden administration which made sure that China became a threatening power in Indo-Pacific, Pacific, and South China Sea. Lots of those incursions and developments occurred during that specific period. And what you're witnessing is the continuation of the same under Biden administration. So there is no saber rattling. There is no Quad. So Quad, basically, they had one meeting. There's no regular contacts around what's happening around the defense. There's no coordination. All those things have stopped in the last 90 days relative to what happened in the first 1 month of Biden administration, which seems to be pure ceremonial and cursory. But the last 3 months, which is when you take May, April, March, nothing.
And a fast-spreading, deadly COVID-19 variant announced in South China. WHO announces new names to COVID-19 variants, while Europe showing positive movements in COVID recovery with Britain. So we are seeing the numbers go down in Europe, but looks like what goes around comes around for China.
Indeed. I think it's now China is significantly impacted. South China and the Guangdong province, the numbers that we are hearing is pretty close to more than 1 million people affected. But you never hear any numbers from China. So I think that's the story. As far as the Europe is concerned, it's very positive news. I think yesterday, if I'm correct, Britain is almost had 0 new cases. They seem to be in a pretty good shape. And also, I think they're one of the almost pretty close to completing the vaccination program for its at least the first vaccine to the entire population of the United Kingdom. So they've done a good job. I think France and Germany seems to be. Holland also is doing reasonably well. Italy is on the recovery, but still not there as yet. Spain, the same situation. But generally, Europe is contemplating opening up its borders for the U.S. visitors, at least for the summer. That is the plan that they have.
And in markets news, oil rises to a 2-year high as OPEC and allies reconfirm lifting production. Oil finished at $68 a barrel, with Brent finishing at $70.56. The pump price now is around $4.75 a gallon. That is the lowest cost in a pump in California, sir. It's outrageous.
There's a very famous, before I just move to this topic, WHO is now renaming these variances with Greek alphabets. So we will give some of these names tomorrow. So it's no longer China COVID virus, but it is some new Greek variants. Okay. Now coming to the oil, the reason why they're lifting the production is now you can drill more, and you can release more to the market because you have lifted the prices, right? You have lifted the prices. The prices have gone from somewhere 34. We were around 40, 45. Now it has gone past 670. Okay, we're touching 70. Makes it effective and makes it efficient. And as you pointed out, that the price per gallon ranges from $4 to $4.75. So there's this famous little campaign that Trump has launched, and he shows this gas station price, which we display here quite boldly, and he's pointing his finger and say, "Look, you already missed me." So that's the truth.
And in world economic leaders call for $50 billion of donations from the wealthy nations to help stop the COVID pandemic. It is airborne. You need to do what you need to do to first preserve yourself, and then you can think about other countries. And now we know for sure it came in from a lab. So if you can turn it on, surely you can turn it off. I don't know what this is. This is just, again, putting more smoke and mirrors. This is my call, sir. Your take, and then we can wrap this up.
So my take is, all of you, if you have not watched PGurus program, interview by Sree Iyer with RV Money. You will know the exact way this program can be launched. And I don't know that, I don't want to talk about the technical terms that Mr. Money has used. So, but if you get a chance, please listen to this program. You will know exactly, you will know how this is what you call harmonized, harmonized, constructed, and how a launch is orchestrated from a terminal. But he's done a damn good job in making the case in that interview. I would encourage everybody, if you have not watched it, to go and please watch it rather than me commenting on it. So on that note, I think that the markets are up, the oil is up. There's more things that we are shutting down, but don't worry, we are going to have a $6 trillion budget coming year after year. Whether you work or don't work, you will have money in your bank account. That is the new regime that we have in the United States.
Thank you very much, Sridharji. And as always, we'll be back tomorrow with more news. And in fact, tomorrow is going to be a cracker of a session because we've been working hard at putting together something that will incontrovertibly prove that Mr. Fauci was hand in glove with the top virus scientist from China. So with that, we conclude today's program, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.